October 1918. Argonne Forest, France. German Lance Corporal Karl Weber, 42 years old, a veteran of Verdun and the Somme, sat in a waterlogged trench and methodically broke in half his daily ration. 80 grams of war bread, Ersatzbrot, a gray mass of potato flour, sawdust, and straw chaff. Caloric content, approximately 1,200 per day, if he was lucky. Weber weighed 54 kilograms at a height of 1.70 meters. His body, depleted by 4 years of British naval blockade, operated at its limit. He could no longer run, only shuffle. Dysentery, scurvy. His platoon had lost more men to disease in the last 2 months than to shells in the entire previous year. 300 meters from him, on the other side of the shattered forest, Private James Collins of the 77th U.S. Division opened a tin can of preserved beef, corned beef, washing it down with hot coffee from the field kitchen. His daily ration, 4,000 calories. Meat, white bread, sugar, real tobacco. Collins was 22 years old, weighed 78 kilograms, and this was his 3rd month at the front. He did not know that the man opposite him, Weber, was physically incapable of attacking his position. Not from fear or lack of courage, from lack of carbohydrates. This was a war won not only by shells and rifles. This was a war won by wheat. What Weber could not have known, crouching in his collapsing trench, was that his defeat had been ordained not on the battlefield, but in the wheat fields of Kansas, the meatpacking plants of Chicago, and the refrigerated cargo holds crossing the Atlantic. The combat endurance of the American expeditionary forces in the final phase of the war was determined not merely by morale or tactical doctrine, but by the highest caloric intake and nutritional quality of any army on the Western Front. Energy, measured in calories, converted directly into combat effectiveness and physical endurance. This was warfare reduced to its most fundamental equation. A soldier is a biological engine, and engines require fuel. By October 1918, the Central Powers were not merely losing the war militarily, they were starving. The British blockade had transformed Germany and Austria-Hungary into vast prison camps where civilian rations had fallen to 1,000 calories per day, and frontline soldiers received barely more. Meanwhile, American soldiers consumed between 3,800 and 4,200 calories daily, a figure that would have seemed obscene to any European combatant, Allied or German. This disparity was not accidental. It was engineered, calculated, and delivered with the same industrial precision that characterized American steel production or shipbuilding. Food became ammunition. Logistics became weaponry. The arithmetic was brutal and inescapable. A German soldier in late 1918 received, on average, 2,000 calories per day, a figure that had declined steadily since 1916 when the British blockade began to bite. By contrast, a British Tommy received approximately 3,500 calories, a French poilu around 3,000. These numbers, however, were theoretical. Actual frontline delivery was chaotic, inconsistent, and frequently interrupted by transportation breakdowns and artillery bombardment. Then came the Americans. When the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps calculated the ration requirements for the AEF, they began with a baseline figure of 4,714 calories per soldier per day, the standard for American laborers engaged in heavy physical work. This figure was then adjusted downward for practicality and logistics to approximately 4,000 calories. But even this reduced amount was staggering by European standards. An American private consumed more protein in a single day than a German soldier received in a week. The German High Command understood the implications. A captured intelligence document from September 1918 noted with alarm that American prisoners appeared exceptionally well-nourished, and exhibited physical stamina far exceeding our own troops. One German officer wrote in his diary that American soldiers carried an insolent health. They were taller, heavier, and moved with an energy that seemed wasteful, even offensive, to men who had been slowly starving for years. The numbers told the story that propaganda obscured. By autumn 1918, the average weight of a German front-line soldier had fallen to 55 kilograms. The average American soldier weighed 73 kilograms. This was not genetics or superior breeding. This was food. The American food advantage was not a happy accident of geography. It was the product of systematic mobilization that rivaled the munitions industry in scale and complexity. When the United States entered the war in April 1917, the Department of Agriculture and the newly created U.S. Food Administration, led by Herbert Hoover, faced a challenge as daunting as any military campaign: how to feed not only the AEF, but also the civilian populations of Britain, France, and Italy, all teetering on the edge of food riots and collapse. The solution was characteristically American: industrialized agriculture at a scale never before attempted. Between 1917 and 1918, American wheat production increased by 37%. Corn production rose by 23%. Hog production, the source of pork, bacon, and the fats essential for high-calorie rations, increased by 19%. This was not achieved through magic, but through mechanization, crop expansion, and the conversion of millions of acres of previously unused land into farmland. Tractors replaced horses. Railroads expanded into remote wheat-growing regions. The entire agricultural infrastructure of the United States became a weapons factory, producing not bullets, but bread. But production was only half the equation. The real challenge was preservation and transport. Fresh meat spoiled in days, bread molded, vegetables rotted. To feed an army 3,000 miles from home required an entirely new logistics system, one built around refrigeration, canning, and dehydration technologies that had barely existed a decade earlier. The canning industry exploded. In 1917, American factories produced 1.2 billion cans of food for military use. By 1918, that figure had doubled. The iconic corned beef, salted, pressed, and sealed in rectangular tins, became the staple protein of the AEF. It was calorie-dense, shelf-stable, and could survive the Atlantic crossing, the French rail system, and weeks in a muddy dugout without degradation. Each can contain approximately 380 calories and 28 grams of protein. A single soldier could carry 3 days' worth of meat in his pack. Then there was bread. The American soldier expected white bread, soft, fluffy, made from refined wheat flour. This was not a luxury, but a cultural expectation, one that the Quartermaster Corps took seriously. To deliver it required portable field bakeries that could be assembled near the front lines. Each bakery unit, staffed by 20 men, could produce 5,000 loaves per day using ovens transported by truck. By October 1918, there were 68 such bakeries operating in France, churning out over 3 million loaves per week. But the logistical crown jewel was the cold storage system. The AEF established a network of refrigerated warehouses in French ports: Bordeaux, Saint-Nazaire, Brest, with a combined capacity of over 100 million cubic feet. These facilities maintained temperatures between 10 and plus 2 degrees Celsius, preserving millions of pounds of fresh beef, pork, butter, and eggs. Ships arrived from America with refrigerated cargo holds, transferred their contents to refrigerated rail cars, which then delivered to refrigerated forward depots. At no point did the cold chain break. By late 1918, an American soldier in the Argonne could eat bacon and eggs for breakfast that had been slaughtered in Chicago 2 months earlier. The scale staggered even Allied observers. A British quartermaster officer visiting an American supply depot reported that he had seen more beef in a single warehouse than in all of London. The French, accustomed to managing scarcity, watched in astonishment as American supply convoys delivered not just adequate rations, but abundance: chocolate, canned fruit, condensed milk, and tobacco in quantities that seemed frivolous. But there was nothing frivolous about the outcome. Well-fed soldiers marched faster, fought harder, and died less from disease. The American ration was not merely generous, it was scientifically optimized. U.S. Army nutritionists, working with civilian researchers, had calculated the precise macronutrient balance required for sustained physical exertion under combat conditions. The result was the reserve ration and the emergency ration, each designed for specific tactical scenarios. The reserve ration, intended for troops in active combat, consisted of 12 ounces of canned beef or bacon, 16 ounces of hard bread, hardtack biscuits, 2.4 ounces of roasted coffee, 2.4 ounces of sugar, 1.6 ounces of salt, total caloric value approximately 3,000 calories, with a macronutrient distribution of 15% protein, 30% fat, and 55% carbohydrates. This was fuel optimized for endurance. But when soldiers were not in immediate combat, they received the garrison ration, a more elaborate menu delivered via field kitchens. This included fresh or canned meat, fresh bread, potatoes, canned vegetables, butter, jam, and desserts. Caloric content, 4,200 calories. A typical breakfast might include bacon, scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, fresh bread with butter, coffee with condensed milk, and canned peaches. This was not merely sustenance. It was a statement of industrial capacity. Compare this to the German equivalent. By 1918, the standard German ration had degraded to 200 grams of Ersatzbrot, substitute bread made from potato flour, ground chestnuts, and sawdust. 100 grams of Wurst, sausage adulterated with breadcrumbs and fillers. Ersatz coffee, roasted barley or acorns. Occasional turnips, total calories. 1,500 to 2,000 on a good day. Protein content, minimal. Fat content, negligible. This was survival, not combat readiness. The consequences were measurable and immediate. Medical officers on both sides documented the divergence. American soldiers gained weight during their service in France, an average of 3 kilograms over 6 months. German soldiers lost weight continuously. By October 1918, German frontline units reported that 40% of their personnel were too weak for sustained physical activity. They could hold a trench, but they could not attack. They could fire a rifle, but they could not march 20 kilometers with full equipment. Energy depletion had become strategic paralysis. Hunger did not merely weaken soldiers, it killed them. Not dramatically, like a bullet or shell, but slowly, through the collapse of immune function and the onset of deficiency diseases. German medical records from 1918 document an epidemic of scurvy, pellagra, and edema, conditions virtually unknown in the American forces. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, had plagued sailors for centuries but was supposed to be obsolete in modern warfare. Yet by mid-1918, German hospitals were treating thousands of cases. Symptoms included bleeding gums, tooth loss, skin lesions, and extreme fatigue. Men became too weak to hold a rifle. The treatment was simple: fresh vegetables and citrus fruit. Neither was available. The Americans, by contrast, consumed canned tomatoes, dried fruit, and lemon juice concentrate as part of their standard ration. Vitamin C intake was sufficient to prevent scurvy entirely. Not a single documented case occurred in the AEF during 1918. Then there was dysentery. Poor nutrition compromised the gut microbiome, making soldiers vulnerable to bacterial infections that well-fed troops would have resisted. German hospitals recorded over 200,000 cases of dysentery in 1918. The American rate was 1/10 of that, despite operating in the same filthy, contaminated trench environment. The influenza pandemic of 1918 struck all armies with devastating force. But even here, nutritional status determined survival. Among German soldiers, the case fatality rate for influenza was approximately 6%. Among American soldiers, it was 3.2%. Well-nourished bodies could mount an immune response. Starving bodies could not. A German military physician, writing after the war, noted bitterly that American medical casualties recovered at rates we considered miraculous. The miracle was protein, vitamins, and calories delivered with industrial consistency. The final test came in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, beginning September 26, 1918. Over 1.2 million American soldiers attacked along a 40-kilometer front. The offensive would last 47 days and become the deadliest campaign in American military history. It was also the campaign where nutritional superiority translated most directly into tactical advantage. The terrain was nightmarish. Dense forest, steep ravines, mud that swallowed wagons, and German defenses built over 4 years. Supply lines stretched to the breaking point. Yet the field kitchens kept operating. Bakeries continued production. Refrigerated trains delivered meat to forward depots within 20 kilometers of the front. American soldiers, even those in continuous combat for days, received at least one hot meal every 24 hours. The Germans, by contrast, were collapsing. Captured prisoners told consistent stories. Rations had been cut to 1 meal per day, usually thin soup and a slice of adulterated bread. Men were deserting not from cowardice, but from hunger. A captured German corporal told interrogators that his unit had not received meat in 3 weeks, and that soldiers were scavenging in abandoned villages for food. Physical performance diverged catastrophically. American units could sustain attack tempos of 15 to 20 kilometers per day, despite casualties and exhaustion. German units, even when tactically intact, could no longer mount effective counterattacks. They lacked the physical strength. A French intelligence officer, observing American troops during the offensive, reported that they moved with an energy and stamina that German troops no longer possessed. This was not superior tactics or training. This was biology. The medical data confirmed it. American soldiers treated for exhaustion recovered after 12 to 24 hours of rest and returned to duty. German soldiers exhibited chronic exhaustion, a condition that no amount of sleep could cure because it was rooted in long-term caloric deficit. Their bodies were consuming themselves. By November 1918, the German army was not merely defeated militarily. It was physically incapable of continuing the war. Hunger had accomplished what artillery could not, the total collapse of combat effectiveness. When the armistice came on November 11, 1918, the nutritional divide between victor and vanquished was laid bare. American soldiers, redeployed to occupation duty in Germany, encountered a civilian population on the edge of starvation. Children with distended bellies, women too weak to stand, men who looked like skeletons in uniforms. The contrast was so stark that American commanders feared it would demoralize their troops. One officer wrote that his soldiers were disturbed by the sight of German civilians begging for food scraps. The U.S. Army began feeding German prisoners and, eventually, German civilians through relief programs, not from altruism, but from recognition that the collapse of public order threatened the occupation. German military analysts conducting post-war assessments acknowledged that the food crisis had been decisive. General Erich Ludendorff, in his memoirs, noted that by October 1918, our troops were no longer capable of sustained offensive action, not due to lack of will, but lack of physical capacity. A captured German General Staff document stated bluntly, "The American soldier is physically superior due to superior provisioning. This advantage cannot be overcome by tactical skill." The lesson was unambiguous. Modern industrial warfare required not just weapons and ammunition, but calories, delivered with the same logistical precision. The American military had weaponized food. They had turned wheat into artillery, cattle into infantry, and the refrigerated supply chain into strategic dominance. The American victory in World War I was not won solely by rifles, machine guns, or artillery shells. It was won in the wheat fields of the Great Plains, the meatpacking plants of the Midwest, and the refrigerated cargo holds of Atlantic convoys. The AEF demonstrated that in industrial warfare, logistics was not support. It was the foundation of combat power. A well-fed army could march longer, fight harder, and endure conditions that would have destroyed a starving one. Karl Weber, the German Lance Corporal, survived the war. He returned to a defeated, starving Germany weighing 49 kilograms. He would spend the next 2 years recovering from malnutrition-related illnesses. James Collins, the American private, returned to the United States in 1919 weighing 81 kilograms, 3 kilograms heavier than when he had deployed. The mathematics of war had spoken. Calories had converted into victory, and the lesson would echo through every conflict that followed. Armies march on their stomachs, but they win on wheat, beef, and the cold, calculated logistics of industrial plenty.